Hey, this is Dr. Rob. Welcome to Biblical Genetics. I am standing here on the shore of Lake Pontchartrain, just on the other side of what was once the longest bridge in the world from New Orleans. Now, I've been to New Orleans before. I have no desire to go back there. And anyway, I have to drive back home to Atlanta today. It's about a 7-hour drive. But I came down to the shore of the lake because I want to introduce something to you. It has nothing to do with the lake at all. It's a series on biblical genealogy. I had this vision that I was going to write a whole series do a whole series of videos for this program on biblical genealogies, because the thing that a lot of people don't like in the Bible and they kind of skip over, but some of that stuff is really important. But then I was realizing that, no, I need to write an article series for creation.com first and then do some videos. And so I'm sharing with my boss this vision I had of his article series, and he's shaking his head while I'm talking to him. It's like, why are you shaking your head? He goes, no, Rob, you're not going to write an article series. You're going to write a book. So, all right, I have a new book project. In fact, I'm already halfway finished. My new book on biblical genealogies. I don't know when it's going to come out. It's a lot of work. Right now, Joel Tay and I, my coworker, we're going through the people named in the book of Job, all of Job's counselors, and we're finding them in Genesis chapter 10 and other places in the Bible. That's a very interesting exercise because the picture's not what I expected. But that's another thing. That'll be a whole chapter later on. But we're going to go through all sorts of cool, like, the lineage of David, the lineage of Jesus, the time of the judges, the time the Israelites are in Israel, Genesis chapter 1, Genesis chapter 5, those long chrono genealogies. But for this introductory episode, I just want to share with you something that's kind of important when we're reading through those passages. Because honestly, the biblical genealogies are really complicated, and they're sometimes really boring, and you kind of get lost. And it's like, what is all this stuff? And you're in Kings, you're in Chronicles, and you're in Genesis, and you're in other places where there's just random names scattered about, and you can't just read through the names because it'll be like, this guy had 3 sons, and the first son's sons are this, and here's a couple of grandsons, and the second son, and by that point you're like, wait, second son of whom? You got to go back several verses. Oh, it's that guy, and then read through, or maybe you're going to outline in your Bible, draw a lot of lines, which I've done, a lot of lines between the names so you can follow them through. That's hard stuff. And then you have some passages which is long series of father to son to son to son to son. And in the King James said this person begat that person. So a lot of times people just call those the begats. And the begats are tedious sometimes until you realize that those names are in the genealogy of Jesus. So, oh, wait a minute, this might be important. But what I want to share with you first, as just an introduction, that there are 2 completely different types of genealogies in the Bible. Very different types. And if we get those types in our mind as we're reading, oh, it's one of those. And it just helps us conceptualize what we're dealing with. The first type of a genealogy is a descendant tree. The second type of a genealogy is an ancestor tree. Those are very different. Very, very, very different. Ancestor trees are easy. I mean, I have 2 parents, I have 4 grandparents, I have 8 great-grandparents, 16 great-great-grandparents. And so it's a nice fan-like structure. And you always know how many people are going to be in the generation before. And so it makes it really easy to diagram. A lot of the biblical genealogies, the ancestor trees, are only paternal, which makes it even easier. That's just a stick. That's just a straight line. Father to son to son to son to son to son to son. Piece of cake. It's the descendant trees that are difficult. Because when you're listing the descendants of a person, you don't know how many descendants he's going to have. You might have 1, 2 in the first generation, 3, 4, 10 in the second generation, 20 or 3 or 15, or you never know how many it's going to be in each generation. And because you can't predict where the next important person is going to be in the line, you don't know, if I'm starting with Noah and I'm going to go to Terah, how to get there, because you don't know. There's just too many names, and if you want to graph them, it's hard. You have to have all these overlapping lines, or you have to have things spread out all over the place. So I've done this. I took Genesis chapter 10, a classic descendant tree. This is the descendants of Noah and his 3 sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth, and their 16 sons, so Noah's 16 grandsons, and a few great-grandsons and a few great-great-grandsons, and a bunch of nations that came out of those people. And I arranged them on a PowerPoint slide, which I use in some of my articles, some of my talks, and it's probably showing right now. If you are listening on podcasts, there'll be a link in the notes so you can find it. But I get all of them on one piece of paper, and it took a lot of arranging. I mean, it took me hours just to draw that one descendant tree. They are hard. We find them in Chronicles. Difficult. We find them in in Genesis, like, the sons of Esau or the sons of Ishmael that are living outside of where the future Israelites are going to live, but they just list their kin back down a couple of generations. And sometimes they just appear in the middle of nowhere. Like maybe in Jacob's account, all of a sudden we're talking about Esau. Why are we talking about Esau? Well, it's Jacob's brother. And so they included the cousins in this genealogical data. It just makes it messy. And so I just want to encourage you that when you're reading through this stuff, that just don't dismiss it. You don't have to memorize all the names unless you're like a geek like me and you want to chart them all, which, I do and I have, and I'm going to be doing more. But you just have to get an appreciation for what that is. It's an account of people trying to capture the data that they knew. Now, when the Israelites moved to Egypt, all communication with their cousins stops. And you can see that in the table. It just stops. It goes a couple generations down, and then it quits. And then when they come out of Egypt hundreds of years later and they start interacting with these people again, they call them by their name. They're the Edomites. They're or the Moabites or the Ammonites. But there are no genealogical connections anymore. It's just he's the king of Ammon, he's the king of Moab or something. But the Israelites don't have that table because they didn't live amongst those people for a long time. So that's a descendant tree. Genesis chapter 10. Following Genesis chapter 10 is Genesis chapter 11, which is a classic ancestor tree. But when you look at one of those trees, we have to understand if it goes from Noah's grandson Arphaxad all the way down to Abraham's father Terah, Arphaxad did not know Terah was going to exist. It's actually written backwards. I know that most of them are written father to son, but it's the last person in the list. It's his genealogy. It's Terah's genealogy going backwards along the paternal line to Arphaxad, who's a son of Shem, who's a son of Noah. That's just a little interesting thing to put in the back of your mind as you're reading this. So we've got a lot of ancestor trees. Genesis number 5, Genesis chapter 5 is another one. That's going from Adam to Noah. But again, it's written from Noah's perspective. There's another one, though, in Genesis chapter 4, which is the sons of Cain. And it goes many generations from Cain forward. I kind of wonder what that's there for. Because why on earth would there only be 2 genealogies for Adam, one through Seth's line and one through Cain's line, when we know that Adam had other sons and daughters? And we know that Seth and Cain would have had more than one son. So why just those 2 lineages? It's just weird. I like to think that maybe when Noah was compiling his ancestry tree back to Adam, I'm assuming Noah compiled it, that there were some contemporaries of Cain in the near vicinity. Lamech, and, that's like the end of the line. And so for some reason, they traced Lamech's line back to Adam also. I don't know. But it's there, and there's these 2 very distinct lines in multiple generations. And another reason why the genealogies are important is because the people who compiled the Bible thought they were important. They didn't have an all-comprehensive genealogy of everyone in the entire country or their entire clan or kindred. They had scattered bits, and they recorded them. And so in Chronicles, you see a lot of disjointed genealogies, little pieces here and there, because they're just trying to record everything they could. And so they're taking all their data, they're putting it into one place, they're writing it down just to save it because it was important for them. Does that make sense? There's your introduction. Ancestor trees versus descendant trees in the Bible. Now, as you're reading in the future, you can look at that and say, what is this? Is it ancestor? Is it descendant? Or is it a hybrid? Sometimes they're mixed together. And those are really complicated. There's a couple in First Chronicles, which I've diagrammed, which will be in the book. And I'll probably do a video about this in a very distant future. But we're going to be able to, in this series, talk about just how Jewish were the kings of Judah. Some of them were less than 50% Jewish because they were, marrying outside of the clans. We're going to be able to talk about Moses' genealogy going through the Egyptian sojourn, and can you span their time in Egypt with just a few generations that were given? We're going to be talking about King David's lineage. If there's missing generations, we're going to be talking about missing generations and Matthew versus King David versus the sojourn versus Genesis 5 and 11. We're going to be talking about, probably at the end, because I have a paper coming out in the Journal of Creation, which we published in July, I've been told. on the genealogies of Jesus, and I think I've come up with a unique new solution for an age-old problem that I believe is going to be able to head off the path people like Richard Dawkins and skeptics.org and this nasty Facebook comment that I got on a video that I posted where a guy actually quoted Richard Dawkins, said the Bible's full of holes because the genealogy of Jesus don't match. Well, careful. There's a solution to that, and it's going to be interesting, but we're going to have to save that for the future because I have to wait till my paper comes out before I put it online, and that's going to be in July. That's like 2 months from now, and I've got a lot of things to say before that. So there's your introduction, Biblical Genealogy 101. There's a lot more coming. It's going to be a fascinating ride, so just hold on to your hats. There's so much more. I want to encourage people to dig into Scripture, to dig into the Bible, and to read it with wisdom, to read it carefully, and to familiarize yourself with the concepts that are there. Again, not memorizing all the names, but realizing why the names are there and what they're telling us about the story. If you like this sort of stuff, I've got a lot of articles on creation.com already on genealogy, on lineages. Jonathan Sarfati wrote a great article about chronogenealogies, where I got that name from. It's a genealogy that also has dates associated with it, so you can build a chronology from it. There's a lot of material on creation.com. There's a lot more coming on biblical genetics. So thank you for all my supporters. Really appreciate you guys. You're helping me. The camera that I'm using, the microphone I'm using, just the fact that I'm here on a chilly morning when I'd rather be driving home to Atlanta. I'm doing this for you, but your support is encouraging me and actually making me do more, because after people gift me a little bit, I buy something, and then I have to use it to bless you back. So world, there you go. There's an introduction to our 2 types of biblical genealogies. I hope that made sense. And there's just trust me, there's going to be a lot more coming, because this is amazing stuff.